Welcome to a new episode of Stories Lost. Buckle up, because this one has it all. A Swedish flight engineer, an encounter with a small saucer man, a book-writing American major, and two young lovers. Have you ever wondered about any of the old boys of ufology? The men and women who dedicate their lives and honor chasing mysteries that continue to haunt both science and our imagination. What is it that sparks their interest, and where does it take them? This episode follows one of the fascinating investigations of a certain Sven Schalin, who was a renowned and sought-after UFO expert in Sweden and abroad up until his death in 2017. For Sven, it all starts one late evening in August 1957. When a coworker stops by his work desk. In an interview with the magazine UFO News, Sven remembers this life-altering moment in these words. He asked if I had read this book. It was called Flying Saucers from Outer Space and was Keyhoe's first book. It was around 1956, so I read it and got hooked. At the time of the book drop, Sven worked as a flight engineer at Saab's design office in Linköping. He soon became a member of the American UFO organization NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, under the legendary Major Donald E. Keyhoe, who authored the book that changed Sven's life. During the late 1950s and throughout the 1960s, Sven was particularly active and helped raise awareness in Sweden about UFO reports and phenomena. The following events are excerpts from Sven's personal investigations into a particularly strange case, published in UFO Information No. 5, 1973. Pursuing the evidence, Sven was mystified, but in the end, he was sure. These testimonies needed to be told to a greater public. This event took place on the evening of August 23, 1967, on the outskirts of a small community in the Kolmården area in the south of Sweden. The witnesses to the incident were two teenage sweethearts, a boy and a girl, both around 15 years old at the time. The account of the events is primarily based on the boy's testimony. The two teenagers were out wandering on a Wednesday evening, and shortly after 8 o'clock, they were on a small road near an industrial site, as indicated in point 1 on the map. The sun had set. In the twilight, the two 15-year-olds saw a reddish glow over the forest. The glow seemed to come from the south. It wasn't very bright, and it quickly descended over the forest, appearing to stop near the ground at the forest edge. The boy couldn't discern any specific shape or contour in the glow, nor did he notice any flying object or structure that could be hiding behind the red light. The phenomenon was completely silent. The teenagers felt uneasy and quickly left the area. They had a disturbing feeling of being observed, as if someone or something behind the glow was watching them. This feeling didn't completely dissipate until several hours later. Taking a direct route home, they crossed a field. They were now at point 2 on the map. Meanwhile, the red glow had risen again and was back over the forest. Almost home, you see the location at point 3 on the map. The girl wanted to turn around to check if the glow was still there. The boy followed, and they decided to take a walk along the road, roughly southeast. Initially, they still saw the glow moving back and forth over the forest. Then it moved away from the wooded area and disappeared to the east. Eventually, the 15-year-olds reached a cabin, approximately at point 4 on the map. They knew it was unoccupied. There was even a padlock on the door. Inside the cabin and outside, they observed strange light phenomena that were difficult to describe. Yellowish lights floated freely inside one of the rooms, and on the outer wall facing the road, they saw a cone-shaped light moving upward from the ground. They also heard sounds like short, muted knocks against a wooden plank. However, they didn't see any living beings. Both the boy and the girl found it unnatural and frightening. Before we dive deeper into this week's episode, I'd like to tell you about Aura and why I use it. Googling your own name might be considered self-indulgent, but I would certainly advise everyone to try it. I just did, and I have to say that the sheer amount of information that can be found about me made me uncomfortable. All this information about me that is exposed and for sale by everyone from data brokers, scammers, to spammers, as well as anyone who wants to target me. My full name, email, home address, health records, relatives, it's all out there. That's why I now use Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. I don't know if you saw this, but AT&T revealed that over 73 million customer records, both existing and former customers, were released on the dark web. They recommend those affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. Well, Aura does all this for me, and best of all, I don't have to download several different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. If my info was compromised in the AT&T data breach, I wouldn't worry, because Aura is always on, always doing the hard work of keeping me safe. I value my privacy, and I value yours. And that's why, in partnership with Aura, I'm offering Stories Lost viewers a 2-week free trial. Go to aura.com/storieslost to start your 2-week free trial, also linked below in the description. Many thanks to this video's sponsor, Aura. Thanks to this collaboration, I can put all my time and energy into creating new exciting episodes of Stories Lost. While the mysterious phenomena in the cabin continued, the red glow became visible again. It seemed to come from the west, approached in an arc, and then took a more northerly course. The glow shifted from red to white, passed by a small grove of trees, and turned in a curve over the larger road before descending onto a field on the other side of a stream. After landing, the glow quickly faded. This entire maneuver occurred while the teenagers were still near the cabin. After these frightening experiences, the two 15-year-olds had no desire to stay outside any longer. They immediately headed home, unaware of what would await them there. They retraced their steps and arrived at the first house, marked H1 on the map, where the boy lived with his parents, while the other house, marked H2, was occupied by his two sisters. Since his parents were not at home, the teenagers continued toward the second house, H2. Just as they reached it, something luminous appeared, hanging freely in the air in front of them. The boy estimated that the object was a couple of meters in front of him and at the same distance from the ground. It was round, with some sort of central light source, resembling a large flashlight. Barely had this happened when a sort of whistling echoed from the brook, which is nestled in a densely overgrown ravine. Neither the boy nor the girl could describe the sounds in more detail, other than that they were very piercing and might be compared to the sharp sounds produced by playing with a blade of grass held between the hands. Almost immediately after the whistling, rapid light footsteps were heard from down by the brook. The steps came in series with occasional pauses, and these footstep sounds approached the teenagers. The boy and the girl took a few steps forward, past the house, and reached the small road stub, 0.5 on the map, which leads to the ravine. Despite everything they had been through, they couldn't suppress their curiosity. Suddenly, someone leaped out from behind the bushes near the house. The leap seemed to be executed with great ease. The boy felt that the figure almost flew up toward them. In the next moment, the figure stood completely still. It was no more than about 10 meters away from the teenagers. The figure was small, around 130 centimeters tall, and appeared to stand with its arms at its sides and its head lowered so that the face was concealed. The clothing looked quite dark. Initially, it was difficult to discern details in the evening darkness. The sparse light from the nearby street lamp didn't help much. The girl thought the figure might be a female acquaintance who lived nearby and perhaps wanted to meet her. She took a few steps toward the figure. However, in that instant, the creature began to raise its head and arms, which seemed to happen with jerky and trembling movements. The boy, following closely behind his girlfriend, realized that something wasn't quite right. "Be careful, he's not human," he screamed to the girl while grabbing her to prevent her from continuing toward the figure. As the creature raised its arms, a dark object became visible in the figure's left hand. It appeared to consist of a protruding part, like a short tube, that then transitioned backward into a box-shaped extension. Beneath the extension, there was what must have been some kind of hand. However, The teenagers never got a clear view of what the equivalent of a hand looked like. They only noticed that it had normal skin color. Possibly, the object the creature held in its hand was heavy. When it stood up, it was supported by the creature's other arm. The relatively large object was directed toward the teenagers. The boy also noted that there was some sort of light or a shimmering arc along the upper side of the protruding part of the object. In a panic, the two 15-year-olds stood there for a brief moment, observing the creature before quickly retreating. During that moment, they did manage to perceive that the creature had a disproportionately large head compared to its body. The upper part of the head was covered with something dark, possibly hair or some kind of hood. This hood was sharply defined against the face and tapered down to a point just above the fairly large and dark eyes, which were difficult to describe. But the boy had a definite impression that there was a penetrating, intense, and eerie gaze behind those eyes. He perceived the facial color as normal. At the location of the mouth and nose, there appeared to be an X. Even here, interpretation remained uncertain. The details were never clearly seen. The creature's arms and legs were very thin. The bow-leggedness was striking. The teenagers couldn't discern how the feet, if clothed, looked. However, it's likely that the creature wore something resembling an overall made of dark, perhaps navy black material, that seemed different on the upper and lower body. Possibly there was some sort of belt around the waist. A peculiar detail was that around the ankles, there appeared to be something resembling a thin wire that briefly emitted an intense white light. This happened while the creature stood in front of the teenagers, holding what they perceived as a raised weapon. The boy told the investigator that the creature seemed tough and threatening as it stood before them, yet somehow also uncertain, as if it trembled or shivered. After the brief but unsettling confrontation, the only thought in the teenagers' minds was to get indoors as quickly as possible. They returned to the house, marked H2 on the map, knocked, and were let in by the boy's sisters. The teenagers were in shock, a fact confirmed by both the sisters and the boy's mother, who met the teenagers shortly afterward. Sven Schalin, ufologist and investigator at the scene, notes that these events are not the only mysterious circumstances that are of importance to this case. In his published article from 1972, he continues to add to the information and stack up arguments that should lead you to seriously consider the credibility of these two young people. He writes, "So far, the account of the main sequence of events is clear. However, it wasn't over yet. Over the next few days, there was an aftermath that also deserves attention. There were some apple trees near the bushes from which the figure had leaped. The day after the incident, the boy found some apples near these trees that had undergone an unusual treatment. They were split open, but no knife or other tool had been used. This was evident from the cut surfaces. On one of the apple halves, there were 5 small but distinct crescent-shaped marks placed in a row, with 6 millimeters of space between them. Investigators argue that it's practically impossible for these marks to have come from human fingernails. If they did, the marks would have been next to each other, not above one another as shown in the illustration. Furthermore, especially on one of the apple halves, there was something resembling thick bands or strands of slimy material. The bands crisscrossed the cut surface. The boy claimed that the slime had a predator-like odor. On August 24th, the day after the encounter with the mysterious figure, the teenagers noticed peculiar footprints, both in their garden and out in the field between their home and the industrial site, approximately at point 2 on the map. Strangely, the footprints in the latter case were near the path the teenagers had taken across the field the previous evening. These tracks were the clearest. Among these unusual footprints, there were also smaller tracks that were completely different from the others. While out in the field, the teenagers compared the foreign footprints to their own and found that the foreign ones were much deeper. Finally, it's worth noting that one of the boy's sisters heard sounds outside the house during the night between August 24th and 25. She also saw through the window a light that appeared to come from some sort of flashlight. The sounds included slow footsteps, occurring in groups of 4 or 5, as well as clicking and scraping noises. In the morning, family members discovered that 2 window shutters had been torn off their frames. The light and sound phenomena occurred around 2 o'clock at night, and the light was on inside the house, which should have been visible from the outside. If indeed someone had been lurking around the house and had caused damage to the shutters, it's quite peculiar that they would take such a risk, despite the lights being on. In his article, Sven Schalin puts forth both questions and answers to his readers. He asks, what should one believe about all this? Did the teenagers invent the whole story, or perhaps imagine it? Or did someone with bad intentions orchestrate the entire thing as a prank? One should be skeptical, and with the help of imagination, seek conventional explanations where they might fit. On certain points in this account, one can perhaps consider such explanations. In those cases, one can naturally fill in the gaps where the account lacks sufficient details, replacing them with what seems plausible to arrive at a natural explanation. It's worth noting that a more thorough investigation would have been warranted in certain respects. However, I lacked the resources, and such an investigation would have attracted unwanted attention. Additionally, during questioning, I refrained from pressing for more details than the witnesses could provide. Certainly, one could imagine that, for example, the apple story might have been staged, or that animals were involved. And what the boy's sister heard and saw outside the house on August 24th and 25 could still have been the work of some mischievous person. However, I've included these details because I don't consider them irrelevant to the overall assessment of the witness accounts. Furthermore, it's worth mentioning that the boy had previously followed an article series in a weekly magazine about flying saucers, and it cannot be denied that the related experiences are oriented within that field. Those reading my investigation might suddenly realize they've found the solution. Everything stems from an easily excited brain interacting with vivid imagination and suggestibility, creating these events. But is that solution reasonable given this long and complex sequence of events? Regardless of conventional explanations, I must emphasize the following points. Number 1, why would the teenagers invent a story like this? If they had, they would likely have been eager to have it published, perhaps by reaching out to a newspaper. Instead, they have actively avoided attention. This is evident, especially when we consider the seemingly impossible episodes put forth. No one would believe them, and they would likely face ridicule, which would be unbearable, especially at school. Number 2, my impression of the boy is that he appears entirely normal for his age. During his account, I noticed his seriousness and sincerity. Moreover, there was an underlying reluctance and fear during the retelling, attitudes that hardly seemed feigned, but rather confirmed that the intense experience was a reality for him. The same can be said for the girl. Number 3, the boy's mother not only confirmed that the teenagers were shocked that evening, but also noted that several evenings after the encounter with the strange being, the boy stayed indoors as soon as darkness fell, which had not been a normal behavior previous to the incident. Considering the events on August 23rd, it's also understandable that the boy had reason to fear another encounter with the creature. The same was true for the girl. Number 4, on essential points, the teenagers' observations align. Only minor differences exist, which is normal to expect. Isn't it strange that two people would imagine the same things that took place over the time frame of approximately 2 hours? Number 5, if this whole thing had been an externally arranged prank, the organizers must have had significant resources at their disposal. How could they, for example, arrange the red light that silently moved through the air? And why keep it hovering over the forest? Furthermore, the boy denied knowing anyone who would have reason to play such a prank. Number 6, the light phenomenon and the strange being as described broadly match similar reports that have poured in from various parts of the world for at least 20 years. Even though most people are unaware of this, and even though our authorities officially deny the existence of such reports, these strengthen the likelihood that there is truth behind the teenager's account. Sven continues, based on these 6 points, it seems logical to assume that the red light originated from some kind of flying craft, aboard which the creature was located. After a brief reconnaissance, the craft landed in the wheat field. Subsequently, the creature set out to investigate something, perhaps taking samples of vegetation, a procedure that has numerous foreign examples, or maybe it performed some other similar tasks. At the end of his investigation, Sven closed the book on all of this and was satisfied to have arrived at what he deemed a satisfactory conclusion. He maintained this assurance for the rest of his life, challenging more conservative branches of ufology that seemed allergic to the mentioning of humanoids or sightings of unearthly beings interacting with humans. He did not believe it would serve ufology to adopt a conservative agenda, where the very mentioning of encounters of the third kind should be hushed, bogged down, or even relegated to the archives, and discounted as people's figments of imagination. What do you think? Hope you add to the discussion below in the comments section. I appreciate your contributions and continued support. Want to support my channel and content creation? Like and subscribe or buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. I'd like to give special thanks to Luke96, Kurt Oyergren, Nashoba Sipokni, Mikael Eriksson, Alexandra Munier, Thomas Tagason, Someone, Jacob Murbach. Thanks for the coffee. Your support means a lot. See you next week.